Good afternoon, good evening. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to this panel on the roots of the revolution in Sudan. My name is Susan Stigant, and I lead USIP's programs in East Africa and the Greater Horn of Africa. The United States Institute of Peace was established by the US Congress in 1984 as a nonpartisan public institution dedicated to preventing, mitigating, and helping to resolve violent conflict around the world. In 2019, the world watched with awe and in solidarity as men and women from across geographies and generations mobilized a mass movement to depose the Bashir regime in Sudan and to demand a democratic political transition. For many watching the news, it was hard to imagine what it must have taken to mobilize millions of people day after day. It was hard to grasp the investment, organization, and leadership that such mobilization requires. And it was particularly striking that sustained protests continued in the face of internet and telecommunications cuts and under the threat and the deadly reality of violent repression by security forces. For many watching, it was truly extraordinary that Sudanese citizens continue to demonstrate the deepest courage, determination, and commitment to nonviolence and the goals of the revolution. And that determination and commitment continues even now, following the October 2021 coup and amidst the political and economic crisis. Today, we have the honor of hearing from researchers and activists about their exploration and their experience with the civic origins of the protest movement. The report that will be discussed, as well as short two-page summaries, are available on the event page on USIP's website. This is a report that is important for Sudan and for Sudan's partners, but also for others leading, accompanying, and supporting political transitions around the world, and who wish to understand the critical role of movements in those transitions. It is our privilege at USIP to advance dialogues and inform policy based on evidence, experience, and learning. We work directly with African citizens, including women and youth, to build local capacities to manage conflict peacefully and to reduce future crises and the need for costly interventions. We advise and work with African political and civic leaders and national and regional governments and organizations to shape peace processes that ensure more sustainable solutions to violent conflict. And we provide a constructive platform for these kinds of discussions and reflections. At USIP, we consider our work and partnerships in Sudan as a top priority. We know that conversations are charged as the country seeks to reset the political transition. We know that the stakes are high as protests are anticipated on June 30th again this year, and violence against protesters continues. We know that today's topic is not a matter of academic interest, but is deeply rooted in the hopes, aspirations, and hard-fought gains of the Sudanese people for a better future. And we know that there may be disagreements and diverging opinions about what is discussed today. And that is precisely why this type of discussion, dialogue, and engagement are needed. It is now my privilege to introduce Mr. Matthew Siebel, Research Officer at USIP's Team on Nonviolent Action and Peace, and your moderator today. Matthew, over to you and our distinguished panelists.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Susan. So as Susan has said, my name is Matthew Siebel, and I'm a research officer here with the Nonviolent Action Program. I'll be moderating today's panel. To get us started, I'll briefly provide some background for the origins of this panel. So the panel coincides with the publication of a USIP special report on the 2019 Sudanese Revolution, written by Maria Marovich and Zahra Haider, two of today's panelists, which investigates the civic origins of the protest movement that deposed longtime President Omar al-Bashir. The report illustrates that while mass protests that successfully removed Bashir in 2019 seemed spontaneous, they did not, in fact, materialize overnight. Rather, they were based on years of determined civil society development in difficult and highly repressive conditions. And we will hear more from Maria and Zahra about the report's findings shortly. We also know that since Bashir's downfall, Sudan's democratic transition has struggled to consolidate its hard-won democratic gains, and progress is now threatened by a counter-revolutionary military coup. So figuring out how to get this democratic transition back on track in Sudan is the object of today's panel. And to that end, it is my pleasure to introduce 4 knowledgeable panelists to help us think through these challenges. Zahra Haider is a lifelong Sudanese activist and is also one of the co-authors of the special report I've just mentioned. Zahra has been a nice, key nonviolent training facilitator with the Nonviolent Action Program here at USIP and has worked with us since 2018 in both Sudan and South Sudan. Maria Marovich is the other special report co-author. She's a former program director for Freedom House and the International Republican Institute in East Africa, and is a senior advisor to the Giza Group, which works on civic media access in closed societies. Jauhara Kanu works for USIP's Nonviolent Action Program, where she is the Synergizing Nonviolent Action and Peacebuilding Program Officer for East Africa. She is responsible for organizing nonviolent action trainings in Sudan, South Sudan, and Ethiopia. Jauhara is also a political economist with expertise in developmental economics. And last, Muna Karashi, I believe she's just jumped on, which is great, is currently a program manager for the Sudan Commission for Social Security and Poverty Reduction, where she works to provide cash transfers to young Sudanese mothers. During the transition period, she has also served as the Minister's Office Director at Sudan's Industry and Trade Ministry and has been involved with numerous humanitarian and development enterprises in Sudan's recent history. So thank you all very much for being here. We're delighted to have you here. Moving forward, the rest of the panel will unfold as follows. To start, Maria and Zahra are first going to provide us with a more detailed description of the report's findings. Then Jauhara and Muna will offer some reflections on the current situation in Sudan. That should get us about halfway through the panel. The second half of the panel will feature a moderated discussion, as well as time for audience Q&A. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type the question into the corresponding window on the main event page online, and I will collate questions as we go. Okay, so I believe that brings us to Maria and Zahra. Over to you both.
Thanks, Matthew. My name is Maria, as previously mentioned, and I will start us off by trying to present in a short and concise way the key findings of the report. But before we move to the key findings, I just wanted to share a couple of notes about how this report came about and what is really the background of this research and how this research was conducted. The reason this research was conducted was for the collaboration between Zahra and me, and as the revolution in Sudan started unfolding, we decided to go on a documentation project, primarily to try to record and document the narratives as the revolution was at its height. So the main research method for this report was conducting interviews with key informants. The interviews were conducted during the sit-in in Khartoum, primarily, and they took place, most of the interviews took place between May 17th and May 27th, 2019. Total number of the respondents for this research was 42, 29 male and 13 female. And within these 42, we held one focus group discussion that included 9 participants. The profile of the interviewees who offered their thoughts and analysis was as follows. We interviewed members of the FFC leadership, of the SPA leadership, a leadership of several different women's groups, media activists, members of teachers union, several civil society veterans, activists from the Demand Group, from neighborhood resistance committees, from political parties, from professors union, members of the political wings of the armed movement, and the leaders of the initiatives. You will see that in the interview, the names are anonymized for security reason. But within these 42, we had a good selection across different generations of civil society actors, which I also think is important as you're listening to the key findings. And we identified basically 3 generations that participated in this research. We had these veterans of civil society who some of them really fought for democracy and human rights since Bashir came to power. Then we had a section of generation that initiated the 2013 protests, which are in the Sudanese imagination considered as the most recent and close to success mass mobilization effort in September 2013 that was unfortunately crushed violently. And we had a generation of interviewees that matured in the period from 2016, and finally those who became active in the civil society in the 2018 and in the neighborhood resistance committees. The reason we decided, as I mentioned previously, to embark on this project initially was really to document, because we are both aware that narratives change and the analysis changes as history happens and as the political circumstances change. So this is actually a kind of a window to that moment when the revolution was at its height. So all the respondents were actually asked open-ended questions, and we asked them to explain in their own words and how they see that the revolution was possible and the success that was achieving at that time. And also to explain why this effort in 2018 was successful versus the protests in 2013 that were crushed. So when we got all these responses and analyzed the interviews, we were basically organizing our research around the key themes that transpired and that were mentioned by pretty much all the respondents. And they defined the key factors for success as follows. So first important factor, the key factor was the unity of leadership. The second was the commitment to nonviolent struggle, or the commitment to the method of struggle, which was also referred to as civil resistance in Sudan, which in the end resulted in increased participation, that is mass mobilization that we saw it. They also, beyond these key factors for success of the mass mobilization, navigated us through the mechanism that enabled this to happen. And the mechanism was something that we defined as different civic spaces that provided a space for activists of all ages to connect, to coalesce and learn. So I will go a little bit and talk about the leadership as a key factor. So what happened is that the key moment that propelled the movement was when the Sudanese professional associations emerged as a leader of the movement. And for those who may be on the call and who are not aware of what Sudanese Professional Association is, it's basically a coalition of shadow unions of teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and other professions. So it all started when they basically decided to shift from presenting their quote-unquote unionist demand for a revision of salaries to the government, and presented the demand to the presidential palace for Bashir to step down. That occurred in December 25th, 2018, but the protests were already taking place across Sudan. And this is actually the moment when the SPA decided to proclaim the political goals of their struggle, and that is how they came to the helm of the movement. The reason respondents claimed that was really important is because the mobilized people really needed some kind of leadership, and SPA at the moment was seen as untamed politically. They were not known necessarily across Sudan. But the mere fact that their leadership was not traditional hierarchical leadership, but that they presented themselves through a number of convincing individuals who were communicating the agenda was really a breath of fresh air. Then they were seen as representing professionals, and in most societies, teachers and doctors and lawyers are seen as respectable figures. Finally, they were seen also as being a sector of society that is in touch with the grievances that people faced on a daily basis, simply by the nature of the work in the communities. Teachers were working in schools and were working with all sorts of students coming from all sorts of backgrounds. The same for doctors. So I'll move a little bit faster now. I suggest you can all read the report for many other details. But this credibility cluster of traits that the SPA had actually enabled them to then later negotiate the coalition and the formation of the coalition that we know as FFC, which became a political vehicle for transition. Then another, as I mentioned, these are the kind of the overall factors that were really important, and unity of leadership and the nonviolent discipline being really important ones. Zahra will talk a little bit more about the nonviolent discipline, but the key mechanism for this mobilization to take place was beyond leadership, that everyone was ready to follow the spaces or the mobilization units where this activity and implementation of the mobilization agenda was taking place. And these came or they transpired in Sudan, in a place where the environment was heavily constricted for activities of the political parties and civil societies. And Zahra, I will hand it over to you to speak a little bit more about what these spaces were.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you a lot. Actually, while leadership that everyone was ready to follow was necessary, without mobilization mechanism organization that can implement activities and work on the ground across Sudan, the 2018 revolution would not be possible based on what we presented in this report. In this research, we identified several keys of spaces that created out of mobilization to reach number we saw in 2018 and 2019. The key space that is a mechanism of mobilization in an environment that it's abrasive to traditional civil society institution, media, and political parties, turned out to be an organic organizational unit rooted on Sudanese traditional of community services and union. So here we talk about Mubadarat, which is mean initiatives, the so-called demands group, shadow unions, and neighborhoods committees. I'll start with Mubadarat. Mubadarat, or initiatives, are a group of volunteers based in Sudanese concept of Nafir, call of mobilize, for common work that stepped in where there is a need or where government was failing to provide much needed services or social services. There were hundreds of such initiatives in the ground with their own network and engaging in wide range of issues in area. Some example included provision of flood reliefs, collecting garbage, offering free medicines and covering medical expenses for families who cannot offer it, organize reading and discussion clubs, collecting and distributing books to school children and so on. There is a many, I cannot just mention all the initiatives. So secondly, the call demand group were organized to advocate for correcting specific policies harming local communities. These were hyper-localized and mobilized around issues like harmful effect of building of the dams in the local farmer, or against land grabbing in farming regions, or even around rights of small worker in the agricultural sectors and sea ports. When you talk about shadow union called professional association of different professionals like teacher, doctor, lawyer, engineering, and journalist. This is another space for mobilizing rooted to along Sudanese traditional of organized labors. They began to organize themselves in 2011 and slowly building network and coalitions. The neighborhoods committees, which the fourth space, another highly localized civic space, organized based on the neighborhoods grade of Khartoum, which was used during Crash September 2013 protests to organize demonstration. Some of those committees survived and continued to mobilize around community needs in neighborhoods in period between 2013 until 2018. At the mass protest gained momentum in 2018, the model expanded throughout Khartoum and become a key organizational unit to deploy tactics of non-violent struggling at very local level, organizing protests, street cleaning, strategy meetings, and listening with and liaising with other actors. Sorry for that mistake. So they were not why they are success. They were not political or highly political, engaged in party politicals. They respond to community needs and grievances. They were embedded in community, so highly localized, delivering community assistance, which is earned them credibility and trust of communities. They employ large network of members and volunteer. Therefore, when SPA leadership emerged, offering clear goals and methods for mobilization, they were able to use the capital that previously built and call those communities to action, and they respond for sure. So finally, I presented, discussed the role of various training, conference, workshop that played an important role as another structural space that prepared actors for mobilization. Those were important for allowing for new skills development, strategy planning, and nonviolence action, which become increasingly available in the period of 2014 to 2018. For lesson learning and reflecting a shortcutting of previous effort and other methods of struggling for building trust, networking, and negotiation coalitions. So all these aspects or all these spaces are reflected in our interviews in different ways. Like, for example, I just want to mention some example. One of our interviews is with the old civil society actors. He talked a lot about capacity building roles in preparing people for this revolution. We also reviewed women activists, and she talked about how women organize themselves, how they increase their capacity, how they deal with the challenge that they face. Some of these challenges are cultural. Also, the last example, like activists that we interviewed, they talk a lot about nonviolence as a value, and how they started learning about it from the training or from movies sometime or something like that. So in this report, we reflect all that, and I will encourage all our attenders to see the report. Thank you, Matthew.
Amazing. Thank you very much for that summary, both of you. I will now turn it over to Jawhara to talk about the current situation in Sudan.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm really glad to be here today with our distinguished panelists. I was actually also very glad to have read the report. It was heartwarming for me, being a Sudanese person, witnessing this history being made. And it also reminded me the effort and all the struggling that people has gone through over this period that the report investigates, and how far have we come. It was also a reminder that the revolution is a state, not a moment. So we still say we're still in a revolution state. Thank you again. If I want to delve into the current status today, I would like to start by focusing on the nonviolent action side of things. The report already investigates how nonviolent actions seeds were sowed, and to some extent they're still being sowed, but they're being ripe at the same time. So it's still an ongoing process. First, I would say that the first outcome, or the first thing that we've been noticing, is accumulated political knowledge that has been taking place. It has been spreading to more people, and even the level of knowledge has been going deeper. In a sense that the political participation, the level of involvement in current affairs, and so on, has been widely spread. We see new groups of women, new groups of young people, and even groups that traditionally have been refraining from taking part in politics. And this is, of course, a positive outcome of nonviolent action, that it generates lots of participation and so on. Additionally, I would also like to highlight how nonviolent action has been adopted in new domains. Of course, Sudan has a long-standing history of nonviolent action movements, but recently we've been seeing new trends. In a sense, we've seen sit-ins and new methods of nonviolent action being taking place in unconventional places. In a sense, areas such as Central Darfur, for instance, had a massive sit-in in Nertati in 2020. Areas such as Eid al-Firsan had their first environmental sit-in in Africa, where they were protesting cutting of trees and so on. So we've been seeing nonviolent action being adopted into the Sudanese context and being dealt with in different cases that are not necessarily tackling the regime, but tackling locally contextualized issues. Another important point that I would also like to mention here is to what extent these nonviolent action activities have been providing room for more critical thought on politics and participation. We've seen so many charters coming out of resistance committees, different resistance committees across Sudan, and we've also seen critics and discussions and lives and different platforms discussing these charters and trying to bring another point of view. We've been having a space to discuss different issues, and also to see the counter narrative of things that might have not been present in the past 30 years. I'm not saying that it has been a rosy picture. However, we do need to recognize the positive outcomes of the nonviolent action that has been ongoing in Sudan, and how it's been teaching and reflecting stories from Sudan as well.
Got it. So I think we were originally planning on hearing from Muna here, but she is dealing, we've learned, with some very difficult circumstances at the moment, so she might not be able to jump on for a little while longer. So instead of that, I'm going to begin with some moderated questions. The first thing I want to ask our panelists about is leadership. So the special report emphasizes the importance of leadership under the FFC coalition and the Sudanese Professionals Association, the SPA. And analysts since then, since the in that post-Bashir landscape, have expressed concerns that this leadership structure that helped to guide the revolution is now weakening, which has made it more difficult for the opposition to present a united front in favor of democracy. So what do you all think that civic actors need to do to re-solidify movement leadership in the weeks ahead? What actions can they take? Why don't we, I'll direct questions here. So why don't we start with Zahra and then move on?
So thank you, Matthew. Based on our research and our interview, they mentioned the three aspects is very important to learn from the September revolution. One of them, ability to unite political forces and masses. That required a lot of trust building, because lack of trust was a big challenge in overcome the revolution. The second things, and it's very important to opening the door and keep the door open for everyone to participate. The best way of that, that even that is create a space of everybody to participate. That's what happened in September revolution. For example, we see that religions had a space, artists had a space, armed movement had a space, traditional leader has as well. Even part of military at the last stage had a space. So it's important for revolution to success, and I want to highlight this point for the current situation. It's extended the revolution, extend the participatory, not close it and making it very inclusive for main actors. The third point, in my opinion, or based on even revolution, commitment to nonviolence. And this is a big challenge now, as Jawhara mentioned. And when we talk about committing to nonviolence, we had an ability to create and be creative in designing activities, or giving a space for people to share in our revolution, to keep it in non-violence way. Like in September revolution, I remember that private sector participated by giving food, water, and several things. So it's important to keep non-violence way, open the door, and be creative in the tactics that we do it. Without that, and that's what many of our interviews say, we cannot have this mass of people in the street, and there is a mass of people not in the street, but they supported revolution in different ways.
Yeah, creativity and diversity and maintaining nonviolent discipline seem very important. Maria and Jawhara, do you want to chime in here with anything else before we move on?
I can chime in. Yes, so what we uncovered during this research and what everyone said during interviews was really that SPA's leadership was accidental, but it was successful because of the credibility. And I remember distinctly one interviewee saying that when you go and take a bus, you don't ask who is the driver, but where the bus will take you. And I think this is what is needed again. So whatever the leadership emerges out of this moment that we are facing now needs to be credible and needs to be able to attract different sectors of the society. Where that will emerge, it's not very clear. Neighborhood resistance committees are, I think, very interesting actor to watch for more leadership, because they have taken since a more prominent role of a political agent. But they need to make sure that they're representative and that they continue to build their skills for this type of political work that is required at the moment.
Yeah, if I may jump in here. I would also like to add something. The report emphasizes the importance of leadership, and yes, it was crucial for the success of the 2018 revolution. But I feel like there's so much, if I may say, overrated emphasis on the importance of a united front or a united leadership. We seem to be focusing on that question very much. We forget talking or mentioning other things, in a sense that if the opposition manages to find the minimum level of unity across basic principles around democracy, around human rights, around commitment to transition and so on, it should be fine for the time being. Because the way I see it is that it hasn't been in anywhere in the world that the opposition was a united front. So why should we expect it now in this moment from the Sudanese civil society, from the Sudanese opposition, from the Sudanese civilian arm in a time in an age where we haven't been experiencing democracy for 30 years? It's not an easy process, and it's not going to be an easy exercise. So I think the emphasis should be like, what is the bare minimum that we can all agree on so that we push forward? And this has been clear just before the coup, that the Juba peace agreement signatories have been opposition as well, and we had the civilian army, which is the civilian arm, which is an opposition now, but they haven't been agreeing on the bare minimum of things, hence the fraction happened. So if we manage to get that level of consensus, at least it should be at least able to move us throughout the transition, and then people can, look for this united front at later stages. But it seems to be a difficult task for me at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a very valuable point that, it's unreasonable to expect the opposition to magically be, perfectly unified. That's just never how things work. So one other topic that I hoped to ask the panelists about involves mediation. So international actors like the UN and the AU have attempted to mediate peace talks between the military and civilian groups. And it seems like these efforts have failed to reach a settlement thus far, and that international actors are very clearly struggling with reputation or credibility problems. So can we talk more about why the protest movement has been skeptical of international mediation efforts, and what, if anything, international actors should be doing to improve those mediation efforts? I see that Muna's put her hand up, so I think she would like to answer that.
Hi everyone. I'm not gonna answer this actually that, but I'm gonna talk about the current situation. Sorry for being late. Today we have an unplanned demonstration, so we have a lot of patients and we have a lot of injured youth. That's why I'm in the hospital with them. I can give just a small brief about what happened in this day. In this day, we have unplanned demonstration everywhere and every day in Khartoum, Bahri, Omdurman, and all the states, which have the leadership from the youth in the committees and the youth in the street. So these days are full of activities, are full of action, because everyone is ready for 13th of June in this month, the big demonstration and the big planned demonstration. So I'm very sorry for not being there. I have the time to read the report, and I feel like the report is really talking about what we have in the current situation in Sudan and what we have in the leadership. And I know that Zahra have a lot of working and activities with the youth in the street and the committees and everywhere to have a leadership from them and to get them to the right way. So I thank you everybody, and I'm ready to answer any question you have it for now. Just I want to say hi now, and if you have any question, I can answer it. I'm listening for you. Maybe I will be out of the videos because I'm with the youth in the hospital. So if there is anything, I'm gonna listen for you all and answer everything you have. Sorry for that. It was unplanned demonstration. That's why I don't know what to do now, but I will be with you in all the meetings.
Yeah, Muna, thank you so much for being here despite the difficult circumstances of today. We really appreciate you attending. So I had asked a question about mediation. I'd be happy for any of the panelists to jump in and speak to the credibility of international mediators, if that's possible.
So I can jump on that, if you allow me. So in my opinion, the mediation in Sudan, especially in this time, need to be create understanding of a deep understanding of the current situation in Sudan. So there is a lot of mistrust in Sudan between all parties. So you cannot create a mediation process, traditional mediation process like what happened everywhere. I know mistrust is everywhere, but now in Sudan there is, for example, there is a lot of valid questions in the street. It's about how we trust that traditional transition justice will be, how we trust that military will give us the power of political power and economic power, by the way, how the power is be balanced to make us appear and participate. That's what you asked it in the street. On the other hand, for militaries, they want people to forgive them about the murder, about a lot of blood spilling in all the day. So without understanding that deep, I think traditional mediation process is difficult to work in Sudan, in my opinion. So listening for everywhere is good, and I see mediation trying to do that now. But at the same time, building trust is the long process. So I think this is a good steps to reach the goal of mediation in my opinion. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I agree that traditional mediation seems to be very difficult given how polarized the system is and just fundamental distrust in the military, which seems like it's going to be very difficult to recover. A related question has to do with the kind of persistence of nonviolent activism, nonviolent protests, and related civil society trainings. So the pre-revolutionary period featured many civil society and activism trainings. The report describes, that thousands of Sudanese protesters over the 5 years prior to the revolution were involved in some sort of civic organizations or run trainings like this. Jawhara and Zahra were both personally involved in some of these efforts. Do you think that these trainings are still necessary or important going forward, or have they mostly kind of accomplished what they set out to achieve? How should we understand kind of these types of civil society building efforts or interventions in Sudan during this stalled transition period? I'll pitch that to Jawhara and Maria, if possible.
Thank you. That's a very good, valid question, Matthew. I would start with saying that research has proven that capacity building is always the best way of intervention during mobilization, first. And second, I feel like in Sudan, we need this more than ever and even more so as we go in the future. And this is based on two opinions. First, these trainings have been providing a platform or basic for movement toward democracy or establishing a democratic system. Sudan hasn't been experiencing democracy in a while now. It's relatively a new state in the modern concept of states. So we're trying to learn the foundations of democracy, democratic building, and so on. So these trainings have been providing this capacity to different people in different areas with the knowledge and so on. The civic education trainings have been allowing people to know their rights, how to interact with the state, how to interact with one another, and so on. Other trainings that are focusing on nonviolent action has been sharing experiences. For instance, an average citizen would know the history of Sudanese revolutions, but might not be fully aware of experiences in different countries and how they relate or contrast with our experiences and so on. So it is providing more knowledge that people can learn from and reflect on. Additionally, these training spaces, as proven by the report, has been providing a platform for mutual understanding. So these spaces have been allowing people to interact in a safe space where they can actually have a dialogue, they can actually talk about different opinions, where you're not afraid of the other person judging you, or you're not afraid of being judged on the ideas that you've been sharing. So it is laying a small foundation of a democratic process where people learn to hear and learn from each other, one another and each other. So yes, we do need these trainings. They're still viable now, and they're even more viable as we move along the transition and as we move to building a new democratic state of Sudan.
And I can add to what Jawhara mentioned, that I agree with on what we said. There is a lot of need of training for sure, but based on our experience in the previous 3 years in the transition period, the state itself need to be built. But I'm not focusing on the state. I focus about teachers, for example, media actors, artist actors, youth in general, neighborhoods committees. These stakeholders need a lot of capacity building to complete the way that we started on 2018-2019 revolution and current revolution, by the way, because there is a big questions about what next, and what next. This question create capacity building, a lot of capacity building requirement for the future of democratic transition. So I agreed on what Jawhara mentioned, but always when we talk about capacity building, we mentioned the activists. Yes, activist is training is very important, but there is a different categories also need to be part of democratic transition, like leadership, community leaders, for example, teacher, as I said, religious people. These targeted groups need a lot, in my opinion. Thank you.
If I can jump also to that, I think that the capacity building we need also for the youth about the democracy, so they can be leading the future of Sudan. So they will need a lot of awareness, a lot of training, a lot of capacity building in democracy and the meaning of democracy, and also the meaning of leadership, how they can leadership not just the street, but they can leadership also the country and the government and everything. So I think the capacity building should be also for the youth. Zahra are doing a lot of capacity building, but I think if anyone can help with that, that's what we need in Sudan. Because most of the youth now, they just know about the demonstration and the revolution. But what next? This is what we need to have a capacity building for it too, so we can have a very good future for Sudan, and we can have a suitable situation for Sudan in the future. Thank you.
Also, I forgot to add women. We want to ensure women participatory in the future, so they need a lot of building their capacity in leadership term, at least, and democratic aspects.
Exactly. If I may add to the points raised by Zahra and Muna, I think the way I look at it is that we have two categories of active people. I wouldn't say activists, but active people in the space. Ones that are somewhat experienced in mobilizing, and some are quite fresh, as Muna mentions, that need to know the principles of things and so on. So for these new people, of course, they need to know the foundations of democracy, of a state, and so on. And it's important for them to know that. And the older group needs to unlearn a few things that they've learned by practice, because for the past 30 years, we did learn some things that are not necessarily the most useful way, and we need to also be humble and know that there are different ways of doing things. And this is what the younger generation has been teaching us, actually, is that it's not necessarily our old way that that we've been repeating is the correct way, but we need to be open and learn new things as well. So some learning and unlearning needs to be done.
Yeah, also I want to add a small point. Actually, even based on our experience, learning and training are one of the process of building trust. So people, when we started to be together, hearing each other, accepting each other, this is a very important part of building a trust and building a future image, common future image for Sudan. So I think this is the most important things in training and capacity building. Thank you.
Yeah, I really like this discussion of the training activities as a way to speak across differences, as teaching people how to speak across differences, which seems really important to the current moment in Sudan. Before I get to audience Q&A, I'll ask one more question that I have, which is about the relationship between protesters and soldiers in the military. So we know that a key component of successful nonviolent action campaigns involves convincing the military, or at least members of the military, to support the campaign instead of repressing it. And that seemed to happen initially in 2019 when the military sided with protesters against Bashir. But since then, it's become clear that the military has reversed course and has argued that ongoing military rule is necessary for security. So, can anything be done to undo this shift? And kind of more specifically, we speak about the military as if it's some monolithic entity, as if everybody in the military is captured by these generals at the top. But I'm curious as to what the panelists think about the relationship between the opposition movement and regular soldiers in the Sudanese army. Could those soldiers be convinced to side with the people and refuse to repress nonviolent protests that are coming up? How do you see the links between the opposition and the military? Go ahead, Zahra, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, based on our interview and which included in this report, one of the factors approaches of the military was distinguishing between the leader of the army who were involved in crimes and the junior officer, in particular the youth. Dealing with the military as a one of block is a mistake in what we're hearing from people who are interviewed. The military needs to analyze with the understanding of their structure and the context in which they were working. In the end, the new Sudan will not be built by one side without other sides. We need everyone. In fact, the imbalance existing in the aspects, and there is no expectation for the army, and without objective dialogue and agreement of common vision, which is the new Sudan that we dream of, there will be no victory. There may be a temporary victory and then return again to the conflict, as what happened usually in Sudan. We need to open the door for dialogue with the military's people or youth who are not part of this. I know that a lot of activists said now that it's rarely to find someone who are not part of the blood rivers in Sudan. But if you open just a discussion with one of the youth, you find that they want all that to stop. They always said, this is not all of us. This is the militaries who stay in the above. We don't want that, but the military structure is like that. So we need to open this discussion to understand them and give them the chance to understand our side, and then focus to bring them in on our side. I think this is very important, especially in that time. And this is what we learned from December Revolution also.
Exactly. I think to answer your question, Matthew, I think we're always like stuck in the two sides of either black or white with the military, whether in or out, as if it's just like one or the other. Why the question should be, how can we deal with the military going forward, and how are we going to reform the military apparatus, the security apparatus, or even the paramilitaries and so on. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it would be nice to live in a world where we don't need an army, we don't need military, and no one has to carry an arm to defend one's country and so on. But it doesn't seem to be logical for the time being. So we have to deal with what we have now. I think the questions should be about talking about unified national security strategies, talking about how can we sway those people who are like in line with our democracy values, in our principles and so on. And I mean, at the end of the day, Sudan can fit everyone as long as we have the main principles, as long as we believe in democracy, and those who refuse, and that's another case. So as long as these people seem to be sharing the same principles. So as I mentioned, unified security strategies, wild consultation about the role of military, the level of intervention in politics, the level of intervention in state governance and so on should be the question, rather than whether the military should be in or out now. I mean, I do hope in the future that no country needs an army, but I don't know if I would live to see that lifetime.
Yeah, also I can add to that on what Johar mentioned. I feel like there is a gap in understanding democracy and human rights in the military sides. Like one of the wonderful things happening in these protests, like you find activists, young activists, by the way, who stand in front of the military and tell them about the value of democracy and value of accepting other and value of human rights. So these protesters, sometimes not always, they're trying to increase the awareness for the other part who didn't. This aspect it's absent completely on their structure and their culture. Question of capacity building. I think these forces need a lot of capacity building in terms of human rights and democracy.
Hi, if I can just add to that, I think as what Zahra said, really all of them need to have a lot of capacity building in a human rights and how to deal with the human rights without using gun and other things. So just would like to agree with that. They really need it. They don't have any capacity building in that. So it's a very big gap. If you would like to have a civil country in the future, government and everything, we need them to be a part of it by training them and by having a capacity building for them all.
Yes, and I just want to add something conceptually from the nonviolent struggle perspective and in terms of how you build the participation and how do you build alliances. What typically happens with the security sector is they do not necessarily can always be completely on your side, nor that should necessarily be the goal of the movement, but more about convincing them to look the other way. So to speak. And there will always be a difference. And I think someone mentioned at the panel that this is not a monolithic structure. There will always be a difference at the calculation at the different level of the security services, where the top leaders usually have much more to lose. Whereas that is not consisted only on a small percent of the leadership, but the security services are also consisted of others who have completely different calculation. And it is possible with the successful movement and the successful outreach and the successful messaging to those different tiers of the security sector to change their calculation and to have them more let me put it this way, less oppressive towards the movement, which is sometimes sufficient.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the focus has been on these high-level dialogues between the generals and the leadership of the opposition, but perhaps we should be more interested in kind of these middle or low-level interactions between everyday protesters and everyday soldiers and how to bridge those divides. Okay, so I'm going to turn to audience questions now. We have a couple great ones. First, Nick Swanson asks about food insecurity in Sudan. So as far as I understand, this is becoming a very serious issue this summer, in part fueled by the war in Ukraine. I read recently that something like a quarter of Sudanese are likely to suffer from serious food insecurity over the summer and fall. So how do the panelists think that this situation is going to impact the ongoing protest movement, I guess, in combination with general economic struggles that Sudan is currently experiencing?
Matthew, I'm sorry, I feel like I missed the first part of your question. If you may just repeat it in summary, please. How food insecurity relates to what?
Yeah, just the ongoing protest movement. How will increasing food insecurity in Sudan affect the ongoing protest movement is the question.
Yeah, if I may jump in here, yeah, food insecurity seems to be a looming crisis, or if it hasn't started already. Forecasts are saying that at least one out of 4 Sudanese people are insecure or in the danger of being food insecure over the next month. And an important link to make here to the nonviolent movement is how access to bread and access to food has been one of the triggers, if I may say, to the ongoing revolution. So yes, it does affect, because the harder the economic situation is, the more difficult it is for people to if I may say, to to deal with whatever political injustice that's there, because at the end of the day, there is active mass that engages in political activities, and there is a huge decent amount of people that just cares about making a living, which is fine. But these difficult situations eventually would lead more people to get involved in this dissatisfaction with a political situation and dissatisfaction with this existing regime, whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, for many people, their goal is to make a living, to have a good welfare, and to have a good life, and so on. But the moment that starts to be an issue, then it might be a cause for more people to be angry, and so on. In addition to the people that are already mobilizing, and so on.
So I can add short sentence concerning that. Based on our interviews and in the report also, one of the successful keys, like people moved not based on the political issue, based on their needs and based on how they see like the leaders are mobilizing and moving based on their need, not high level of political aspect. That's why I think insecurity is supporting revolution to continue. Food insecurity. Thanks.
Okay. I just got another question from Hamid Khalafallah, which is what needs to change to enable the international community to engage with the pro-democracy movement in Sudan more effectively, specifically the resistance committees. So we know that since in the post-Bashir landscape, the resistance committees have taken on more of a central role in opposition organizing, as the FFC and the SPA seem to have become less credible actors. So how does the international community more effectively engage with the resistance communities?
If I can jump to this directly, I think the most important thing that they need to have more communication with them. They need to listen for them more, and they need to listen from everyone in the residential committee, especially to know from them what they need, to know from them their objective, to know from them the change they are looking for. So I think the first thing and the most important thing that they need to listen for them and have a more communication with them, more communication tool, not just like a meeting. Maybe it can be through the messages they can send through the media, especially the social media, through the direct meetings, through the online meetings, through the every communication tools they can have it. So whenever you have more communication and more connecting with the residential committee, they can trust you more and they can tell you more about what they need and the change they are looking for. So this is my adding point, the communication and the communication and the communication.
I think Muna sums it up very nicely, but I would like to elaborate more on this. I think the benefit of the resistance committees or the advantage of them is that them being horizontal in a sense that there isn't like a clear hierarchy. However, this is also a disadvantage for some people, is that it's not easy for you to, get someone as a leader of the resistance committees and, get consensus on whatever point that they say and so on. And this is a new domain that the international community has to deal with. Like historically, you go into a country, you get 5 opposition leaders, you get them in a nice hotel, you have a meeting, and then you have consensus, they share it back with their people. But now it's not the case. Now we have to do the hard exercise of appealing to people, make them come to us rather than, sending invites and so on. In a sense that, we need to find ways that resistance committees can actually trust us and come to us and share things, be it international communities, be in all civil society, be in whatever and so on. And this is a very important thing. However, doing this exercise will always crippled by the international community's bureaucracy. The resistance committees have a very fast pace. One day, like they organize something, next day they're out in the street. But the international community is always crippled with the bureaucracy of making decisions, of hearing this statement, and then a month later we would hear like an action coming out of that statement as well. So it's a new domain that we need to investigate. And if the international community is actually keen on moving forward, the new methods need to be adopted. The same way we adopted new nonviolent action techniques, the international bureaucracy needs to adopt new ways that fit the new scenarios that we're dealing with. And it's not just a Sudan thing. Across the globe, people are evolving and are innovating new techniques, and hence the global governance system needs to adapt.
Maria, I thought I got a sense that you wanted to add something here. No, you're good. Okay. Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, it's in the same way. I just want international community, if you can send a message here, understand that the future of Sudan is built by the image of this generation, this new generation. So stop dealing with the old generation. You need to understand that this generation had a view of future of Sudan, and it's a most bright view of Sudan. So, according with them as a leader. Give them a chance, give them the space to present to the world. That's the only way to understand how they think and where we want to go. Thank you.
Yeah, so more dedicated engagement with youth activists, I think, is the clear message there, despite the coordination difficulties of decentralized movements. So one other audience question comes from Riel Khalifa, who asks, how important was the use of social media in terms of mobilizing people into nonviolent action, and particularly in creating solidarity amongst the Sudanese diaspora living abroad? I'll pitch that to Maria and Zahra to start because they address it in the report.
Yes, it was incredibly important. That was one of the spaces that we didn't analyze in depth in the report, but that definitely played an important role as a communication space, as mobilization space, as a space where all sorts of activities were taking place, including reporting on the security risks that were present during the mobilization and so on. Definitely, the internet penetration is a factor there, and not everyone across Sudan was able to use these spaces. Social media and different messaging applications. So people figured out the way how to move and transition between those who had access to internet and using more traditional means of communicating, even, from the meeting to the communities verbally, based on what was happening on the social media. So thank you for that question. I wish we spent more time in the report discussing that, but it was definitely a very important element of an important, let's say, a factor that facilitated organization. And as one of the even senior civil society leaders said during the interview, basically Facebook at one point during the revolution became this public forum, like a public assembly. Where the ideas were shared, where the ideas were refined, and through which, for example, SPA accepted some ideas that were coming from the ground up.
Yeah, I also want to add the question that it's not provided concerning that. I think Sudanese diaspora, play a great work during the revolution, during September revolution until the moment. So I want to highlight some issues that they did actually very effectively. When the regime shut down the internet 2 times, the diaspora people transferred the information about human abuse to the world. So if you remember the campaign of Blue Sudan, it's completely organized by diaspora people. They also add a lot in organizing people in the ground, and they are very well organized. And I see a lot of diaspora people in different countries supporting the revolution or supporting change. But Sudanese revolution, they are unique because they started to organize themselves. There is a lot of group in Twitters, in Facebook, in different groups, even in the ground, to support the idea of revolution until the moment they continued. They didn't stop. They didn't feel that we done. And they organized even offline activities. Remember the big march in US in Washington based to supporting the revolution. So I think this is one of the unique aspects of Sudan revolution. And as Maria said, we didn't cover this in our report, but we think this is another thing because, in my opinion, this is something need to be researched separately. It's a big issue. how the diaspora doing, what they're doing for the revolution, and still doing till the moment.
Yes, and there were some. We didn't investigate this further, as Zahra mentioned, but it's definitely worth exploring more, because in this case, diaspora played a very positive role, which is not always the case when we are talking about different diasporas around the world, right? And I think they also supported with funding, which I think it's really important to mention.
If I may appeal to a certain part of the question about how social media contributed to building solidarity among Sudanese people, be it in Sudan or outside Sudan. It's true that not everyone has access to social media, but it has been evident that social media has been contributing to building a unified solidarity about issues ongoing in Sudan. Sudan is a very big country, and not necessarily everyone knows about issues happening in other regions, and this has been the case for years. You would see that, there is a massive incident happening in Eastern Sudan, and the rest of the country not necessarily engaging with it or talking about it. This is not the case anymore. Whenever something happens in any part of this country, now there is access to knowledge about it, and people are actually engaging, demanding change, and so on. And not only that, even politicians, public figures, and leaders are being called out when they don't engage to these local issues. So, for instance, if a leader, whatever leader, political, whatever, in Khartoum, tweets about why something is happening in Eastern Sudan, people would be like, people are dying in Eastern Sudan, why are you not talking about that matter, and so on. So it did contribute to building a unified solidarity about whatever issue that's happening across Sudan, and so on, and it's still ongoing. And
yeah, these effects are difficult to kind of quantify specifically, but I think it's clear that it was quite important. So we're about at the end of our time here, and I just want to give the panelists one last chance to chime in here with what key message or takeaway would you most like to send to our audience today about the ongoing protests and efforts, pro-democracy efforts in Sudan. I'll start with Jawhara here, and then we can go around the table.
Okay, I was taken by surprise, actually. I think the key message is that there is a lot to learn from the ongoing revolution, and still unfolds, and it's still ongoing. And there's also a lot to provide. So as long as we have that in mind, we don't need to like keep our hands off Sudan. We need to still keep supporting the ongoing change.
We'll have to call on somebody. How about Maria?
I think it's clear, and I'm echoing Jawhara here, that Sudan belongs to the generation that carried out this mobilization, and that was active during the revolution, and that is the generation that needs to be supported.
Muna, Jawhara, Muna, Zahra, feel free.
So I want to send a message for Sudanese new generation who protest, especially today in the street, and they prepared for 13th of June, a big event. I want to say that nonviolence is work. As one of our interviewer told us, me and Maria in the sitting, he told us, it's work, non-violence, it's work. That's what he said. So it's work, but also we need to commit to it, and we need to understand the two pillars of non-violence to success. The one pillar is to power of people, building power of people, extending the participatory in the revolution itself. So we need to know that we want to add more people, not dividing people. So any mentality of dividing is against a revolution itself, a non-violence revolution. So the second pillar, and very important, we need to understand our steps, where we go, what the value in each is, what's our objective, what the vision of Sudan. So in my opinion, one I learned from this report and from our trainings and non-violence research, previous research, non-violence does two things: extending the revolution itself and strategize. It's very important to strategize our steps.
Awesome. Muna, you have any final thoughts for the panel before we close out?
Yeah, I would like to thank you all for that, and I'm sure that like this meeting, it will be very useful for all of us. And I'm gonna say sorry again for not being with you, but we have really a very hard situation here in the hospital as we have a lot of people. So I'm so sorry for that. But really, thank you so much for this meeting. And I think again and again, if we have a lot of like this meeting with Yosan, with people and with the residential communities and with all the civil society, it will be very useful for us. And if we have more discussion in the report, because the report is very important and have a lot of finding that is very useful for the people. If we have a lot of discussion for it with more people from the community as a general, it will be very good for all of us. Thank you so much again.
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity again to thank all of our panelists for attending, some in very difficult circumstances. We really appreciate you all being here. And thanks again to the audience for joining us. We hope that you found this as engaging as we did. Until next time, thank you all again.